Hello and welcome to the Women in Sport Leadership Panel. We are so excited to have everyone here today. I'm Dory Branch. I'm the Associate Director of the Bobcat Career Network in the Ohio University Alumni Association. To give you a little bit more about this panel, for some of you who maybe haven't heard about it, the Women in Leadership series highlights women from a variety of industries who have demonstrated success in their fields. So on this panel today, you will hear about their journey, the strengths that they've utilized, the challenges they've overcome, and what vision they have for the future of the industry of sport. So this is the first panel in the series, so we're really excited today to have everyone here, and we will share a little bit more about the upcoming events at the end of our panel today. If you have any questions or comments throughout the panel, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. You can select all panelists, and then that way we'll be able to get those questions answered during our Q&A portion of our event. Awesome. So now I would like to introduce our moderator for today's event, Dr. Melissa Davies. Dr. Davies is an assistant professor in the Department of Sports Administration in the College of Business at Ohio University. She teaches courses in both undergraduate and graduate levels and researches brand development, brand communities, and fan consumer behavior. So thank you, Melissa, for moderating today's panel.
Great, thanks, Dory. I would now like to introduce our panelists, who we are very grateful to have with us here today. The first is Melissa Wells, who's a graduate from the Scripps College of Communication and discovered her passions for communication, business, and sports during her time here at Ohio University. Melissa currently serves as Senior Manager of Partnership Development at the NBA and has been doing so for about 5 years now. She created best-in-class marketing partnerships across the NBA and their ecosystem of leagues, including WNBA, NBA G League, NBA 2K League, USA Basketball, and Basketball Africa League. Before working at the NBA, she was with the marketing team at NBC Sports Group, where she was responsible for the development strategy for brand sponsorships across NBC Sports properties. Welcome, Melissa. Our next panelist is Katie Myers, who graduated from Ohio University and received her degree in interpersonal communication with a concentration in sport marketing. She recently began as the Global Vice President of Talent and Leadership Development for Ceridian. Prior to that role, though, she was working with the MLB as Vice President of Human Resources and Talent Management, and as the Senior Manager of Learning and Leadership and as Director of Talent Management for the NBA. And finally, we have Tracee Ellis Ward, who attended the University of Missouri for her undergraduate, where she was an All-American women's basketball player. She's an Ohio University alumnus where she obtained her master's in sports administration. Tracee currently serves as the Senior Associate Commissioner and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Big East Conference. She's pursuing her doctoral degree at Gonzaga in Leadership Studies. Her career has been spent working within sports from the athletic administrative positions at 4 universities. She's been sitting on the NCAA Women's Basketball Competition Committee and served as the youngest and only African-American female administrator in the department at MSU. We have a few questions prepared here for our panelists, but we'd also, as Dory mentioned, like you to add any Q&A in the chat, and we'll have an opportunity towards the end of this panel to get some of your questions answered. All right, so we're gonna get started. And I'm actually going to start with Melissa for this question, and then we'll move on to Katie and then Tracee. So this is kind of a broad question to get us started, and just looking back, and what are some of the strengths that you can pinpoint that have helped you to be so successful in your career? We'll start with
Sure. And thanks everyone for having us. I'm so excited to be able to represent and get to speak to some OU folks. Definitely jealous of those that are sitting in Athens right now. Would love to be there. Yeah, it's a broad question. I think there's definitely a few things that I always tie back to my journey and kind of where I've been and where I'm going, and things that I think continue to drive me. And the one thing that I think has really set just me apart personally and professionally in this journey that I'm on in life is just the ability to be uncomfortable. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes it doesn't, of course, feel good. But when you feel uncomfortable, I felt those are the times where I'm developing the most, and I'm actually seeing the most growth and really pushing myself to that next level. So I've seen some of the best leaders and some of the people that I kind of look to as mentors and people that I respect have continued to say, when you know that it's kind of that time, or you're feeling too comfortable in a position or a particular team and you're not feeling challenged, that's when the best leaders really pull back and decide to lean into something different and continue to push themselves. So I feel in my career, and of course at OU, I started kind of this passion for sport, and I joined the 2012 London Olympic kind of study abroad trip that we had back in the day. I'm dating myself a little bit, but I was a student correspondent at the Olympics, and I really saw there all the plethora of opportunity that there was in sport. And OU really connected me to that. And from that moment, I felt like I had to find those opportunities where, okay, I did this, I checked this off the list. Like, what else is there that I can kind of go through and see what works for me, what I like, and maybe what does challenge me the most. So I would say there's a million things, but being uncomfortable is key as part of anybody's personal development. And that's one that I would continue to lean on in the future as well.
Great, thanks. Let's pass it off to Katie.
Thanks, Melissa. And I agree with everything that the other Melissa just mentioned. First and foremost, thank you for including me in today's panel. Very happy to be here. It was funny. I was actually recently talking about talking about this with Sarah Schneider. So shout out to her for bringing me into the OU Alum Network recently. I really appreciate that. We were just talking about some of the strengths that I had learned at OU and have been able to parlay into my current role. And the one theme that just continued coming up was communication skills. Sounds very obvious and very basic, but it is absolutely the case. I don't even want to count how many public speaking courses I either took part of or was, attending at OU. There was a lot. And let me tell you, looking back at my time, I think that that's really been very helpful and very valuable for me. I'm in the HR industry, so talent management, talent development, and really being able to flex my style and be agile, and being able to flex, whatever kind of conversation I'm in, et cetera, have really been helpful. So I credit a lot of that to OU and a lot of my speaking opportunities. Another thing that I would say for strengths is just continued working on building relationships, relationship management, especially as you move into more of a leadership position. You're going to be working with all different types of people and all different types of personalities, start partnering with the different sports leagues and all those different things. So I would say communication and relationship management from my perspective.
And Tracee, what skills and strengths?
I don't know what other skills are left on the table. Melissa and Katie did a great job, but for me, I'll probably use different words, but probably will translate to some similar things that you've already heard. But for me, I would say the main skills are courage, resiliency, and the capacity to be empathetic as a leader. The courage piece, Melissa kind of touched on it and used that word uncomfortable. I think from my career looking back, there's times that I had to do things that maybe what might make most people a little bit fearful, right? So you have to find that internal fortitude to push ahead and do things perhaps that are a little innovative and maybe haven't been done before. So that takes courage, and that takes practice, kind of stepping out time and time again to do things that are a little bit different. And then the resiliency piece, as you know, in sports, there's always a winner and a loser, right? So every great idea doesn't always be successful. So you do have to have the capacity to be resilient and bounce back when things don't necessarily go right. And it could be a crisis that was thrust upon you, or it could be your own mistake. But you have to learn to bounce back and keep moving forward. And then the last piece ties back to Katie's comment about relationship building. And for me, it's that capacity to be an empathetic leader. And I don't know who said it. It's a quote that you might hear and might have heard before, but people don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that you do have to invest in people in this industry and really in any industry to develop a career path where you have credence in terms of not only your work, but how you treat people. So those are the three things that I would say for me that have been really important in my career.
Excellent advice so far. So in reading your bios and when we hear about these, major league positions, we might think of kind of the glamour of it all. But my next question for you, and I'll start with Katie, is what are some common misconceptions people have about working in sport?
Yes, I think that you just hit the nail on the head, that it's glamorous, it's exciting. I'm sure Tracee and Melissa I see some heads nodding. I have a feeling it's going to be a common theme. But, you know, if you mention I'm with this league or I was at this event, you know, as you see the glamour, the glitz, and all the excitement, there is definitely a lot of that. You know, when I would ever mention I was at an NBA event or MLB All-Star, et cetera, it's, oh, you were hanging with the players all week. Not so much. There was a little bit of that, but it really is so much hours, a lot of hard work, which I know a lot of industries are, but I would say sports is especially so, because a lot of times it is back to the flexibility piece. Things are coming at you at the 11th hour, and whether or not you were prepared, most of the times it really didn't matter. It's just you are going to be flexible and you're going to do it. And a lot of times it's with grit. You're rolling up your sleeves no matter what role you're in. The great thing about the sports industry is that so many people go into it though, because they do have that common passion and that excitement for the industry. So I would say that would be, you know, one of the misconceptions.
Great. And Tracee?
I think Katie summarized it perfectly. Not in addition to that glamour piece, I do think that a lot of folks think it's easy. And I had a boss that used to say, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it. And so I think the time commitment also is probably a misconception. It's not a 9-to-5 kind of a job, whether you're at the college level or the pro level or even amateur level. There's a ton of time that needs to be invested, not only in the job to do it successfully, as opposed to, you know, like I said, a 9-to-5. I don't think people realize the depth and breadth of the time commitment that it takes to actually be successful in whatever role you might have in this industry.
Thanks. And Melissa?
Yeah, so I would echo all those points, and I'll kind of take a different direction here, just because I think there's a few other things that I would say as of late, in terms of my current work experience. I've been hiring a lot more people for different roles across the MBA and doing more of a collaborative approach on how we get, you know, better diverse hiring and making sure we're interviewing different candidates for different groups. And I've been a part of that process. And I think the one thing I continue to notice, and look, I love sports, obviously, right? Like I think there many of us do, whether you work in sports or not. I played basketball. I'm definitely not anywhere near as good as Tracee, I'm sure, for many reasons. But I love the game. I've been a fan for a long time. And I think when people come into an interview for a place like the NBA or the MLB, they talk about how much they love that sport. And look, I can appreciate that, but that's not really why you're here. You know, what can you do for the organization? How do you look at it from a business standpoint? How do you bring something different to the table that I don't already have? So I continue to try and look at what rounds out a team. And often we all share that love for sport, right? But I've also seen people come into the MBA for certain roles that we've hired that have no true background in sport, and they actually don't have a true connection to it, you know, in the way that maybe I have or my colleague has. And they do an exceptional job because they bring that other perspective that really rounds out the group. So I would say, just in terms of advice as well, you know, don't get hung up on the fact that you may have not had direct sport experience, but focus on what those skills and what your experience has brought to the table for that particular role that maybe some other folks don't have. So I would just say that's probably a misconception, that you have to love sports and you have to be so passionate to really get the job. It's more about your skill set and who you are.
Yeah, great point. The next question I'm going to move on to is, being that this is a women in leadership panel, I want to know, what's been the biggest challenge for you in the workplace as a woman in a predominantly male industry? And then maybe if you have any insight as to what strategies you've used to navigate that. We'll start with Tracee on this one.
Yeah, that's a great question, Melissa. I think, you know, when I think about it, for me, it's really been listening to my own voice was probably the challenge early on in my career. Yeah, you might be in a meeting and you're sitting around and you don't see anyone that looks like you. You don't necessarily see any other people of color, or even sometimes another. And so some of the conversations are going a certain way, and you're like, well, what about this perspective? But you don't want to necessarily be the one to say it, because again, you're the only one in the room. And so over time, I had to learn to really find my voice, because it was important. When I was silent, mistakes would happen, right? And I remember poignantly in one of the meetings, this was my days when I was at Michigan State at that time, another alum, Greg Ianni, turned to me and said, Tracee just said something and she rarely speaks. So when she does speak, I think we better pay attention. And for me, that was like an aha moment to say, okay, I need to start speaking up more. and listening to my voice, because I have something to say that's important and valuable, and it's going to help this organization. So I think for me, that biggest challenge is being sometimes the only one in the room with finding my voice and how to navigate that in the leadership role.
Thanks, and we'll go back to Melissa.
Yeah, so I think that's so valid, Tracee, and listening to your own voice and really respecting who you are and leaning into what you bring to the table is so important. And I think as you mature in your career, you get better at that. That's something that I've definitely feel I've grown in over the past 5 years at the MBA. And I will share one story that I always reflect on when I feel nervous or a little bit sensitive to bring something up and really speak my truth in a meeting or bring my perspective. And we had a client meeting in Kentucky with one of our partners, one of our basketball vendors. And I walked into the room and it was a 20-person conference room full of just men only. There was one seat for me kind of at the edge of the table. I was presenting. I was a little bit nervous. It's probably my first year at the MBA. And a lot of men didn't think I was going to necessarily maybe bring what I brought to the table in terms of knowing my facts, really having a good perspective on the partnership, making some recommendations. And I think when you have those moments in terms of just things that you can do to combat and really make sure that your peers are respecting and leaning into what you're saying, you really want to speak up and to leverage that opportunity to showcase you do know your stuff and you do have a space at the table. I think sometimes I have a lot of male coworkers who are so supportive and inclusive, and I still have some that, we're working on and they have to be reminded. And I think it's okay to acknowledge we're not there yet. We've got a long way to go. But there's definitely tactics you can use to really hold your ground and really respect your own voice. And even the other day, I was chatting with a coworker who I don't think he means any malicious intent by anything that he says, but it comes off very matter of fact and a little bit derogatory. But he was like, well, let's get time on my calendar. Let's do this. Like, let's kind of make it about me and you follow suit and you follow in line. And he does that to a lot of women in the workplace. And I was like, yeah, my calendar's up to date. Sounds good. Like, I think there's little ways that you don't have to let it feed in or totally own your experience, but there's ways that you can continue to push back and really speak up and help represent for others that are coming behind you.
What about you, Katie?
Yeah, so I joined the sports industry in 2015, and I have to say I have really seen the needle shift in the past 7 years. There are more women entering sports than ever before, so that's been great. At the NBA, there was a lot of females in my position. When I moved over to MLB, I was definitely one of the only senior female leaders. And I thought a lot about it and just, my approach, like Melissa said, walking into the meetings, I've definitely been the only female in the room multiple times or on a Zoom and realized, I have the seat at the table, and my advice to others would be make sure you use the voice. You have the seat, you have to use it. I oftentimes found myself taking advantage of the fact that I did have the diverse perspective, like Tracee said. And anytime that I wasn't quite sure or, felt like I had imposter syndrome, which is a real thing, any of those, I often had to remind myself, and I found comfort in the fact of it's not about me, it's about all of the individuals that I'm representing. Again, I fall under the HR umbrella at most organizations. So oftentimes it's not about Katie at all, frankly. I am the voice of all the employees. I am the person that's representing all of our talent. So for me, that was one tip and strategy that I used frequently to overcome any types of those challenges when I was in those situations. So you have the seat at the table, don't be shy to use it, and then also think about all the other people that you're helping along the way.
That's actually a great segue to the next question here. So in thinking about that evolution of the industry, this is a two-part question. So first, more optimistically or positive, what's been a highlight of your career? And then what do you see happening in the next 10 years? So let's start with Melissa on this one.
Sure. So I was thinking about this earlier, just in terms of looking back, and there's so many things that I've loved about my career. And I often I'm a glass half full person, that those that know me, and I try and think about the good things and the things that have really helped shape the positive parts of my experience. But I also thought about some things that really helped me grow and develop. And again, that being uncomfortable and thinking about the highlights that also got me to the good parts of my story. And, I would say, like Katie made this point, people think it's a little glamorous when, you take the picture at All-Star on the court, finishing the weekend or the 2 weeks that you've, been up till 3 a.m. trying to activate a partnership. And those are the moments that people see from a social media perspective, but people don't realize the struggle and the kind of triumph that you had to go through to really put those things on display and actually let the world get a glimpse into your work. So I really love being a part of those parts of the behind the scenes moments. I know that I mentioned being a 2012 London Olympic correspondent through OU, and those are some of the things I also reflect back to, because those were highlights that I didn't know were highlights in the moment, right? Like there's so many things I take for granted now because I get to do it, and I've had that access, and I've put in the years and the time. But when I had my first taste of just a true sporting event that I had access to, that I was kind of a voice there, that was really special. So I would also say, like, if I could go back, I'd probably appreciate those times a little bit more, and actually use them to my advantage later on in life as I reflect and really think about what got me there. So I think all the fun stuff, draft, the moments, the events, but it's really for me those like triumphs and those little moments that got me to that Instagram post or that fun thing that I'm sharing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and then did you have any kind of, what do you see happening in the next 10 years? What are you excited to see in the
Yeah,
next?
I think there's so many things, and it's actually really exciting. I think from an MBA perspective, I know Katie's familiar with this. Like we've put a lot of effort and time into really thinking about, okay, COVID-19 happened. How do we respond? How do we really think about new assets, creating new opportunities for players? How do we support from a different standpoint? I've worked a lot actually in the past few years on the WNBA specifically, because I work across all properties, and we focused a lot on our Changemakers platform, which is a kind of a first of its kind partnership platform where we're having brands come in and actually help support the player salary and really help enhance their experience. And I think more of that really impact-driven partnership trend and those kind of collaborations are going to be so prevalent as we move into the next 10 years. And I mean, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, crypto. There's different sponsorship things happening kind of in my sector of the world. But I think from a fan perspective, a lot of sport is just going to be purely about that personalized experience. How do you get closer to the game? How does it work for you? And how do you get that customized experience from the NBA, from MLB, from NCAA? Like people aren't going to show up at the table unless they have that really custom approach. So that's something that the NBA, I know we're focused really closely on. And even in my role, it's kind of my job to really think about what's the brand strategy in terms of partnership and how do we connect with the right brands to do some of those things. So I continue to look for, who in the industry is doing the new impact driven best kind of technology advancement. Like how do we get close to that? How do we understand it and go first and try it and kind of test and learn? So I think those are some of the trends that I see from a broad standpoint, but I know there's already so much going on post kind of the COVID boom here and trying to innovate.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of excitement you just shared. I look forward to seeing how that all plays out as well. Katie, I know you're not necessarily working directly with MLB anymore, but highlight and then what you see for the next 10 years.
Sure, absolutely. So I've definitely been at all the fun events that Melissa mentioned, and back to the glamour. That was the fun side of things, absolutely. At draft and All-Star and things along those lines. As I've thought about the highlights of my career specifically, all the things that Melissa just mentioned, she focused on externally, are the things that I focused on internally for both NBA, the league office, doing some consulting with the teams around the country, but primarily Melissa specifically being one of my clients internally at league office, and then also for Major League Baseball, so focusing internally on the league. And as I've thought about the highlight of my career, a lot of things that folks in marketing and things are doing externally, the highlights were for me bringing those types of things internally to the employees. So for example, at NBA, we rolled out something when I was part of a team that rolled out for the first ever something called the Career Strategies Workshops. That is not anything that's not unheard of by any stretch of the imagination to the tech world or financial services. That's sort of a norm. In the sports industry, those are new sort of concepts. Sports is sort of coming along, taking good to great in a lot of ways. So that was one highlight that I remember. The minute that we rolled it out, employees raved about it. It was the first time that they ever started thinking in a different way and shifting their own mindset for their own career, right? It's not necessarily just a ladder, especially in sports, that I'm going to wait till my leader moves off the rung and I'm going to move up. It really is more about a rock climbing wall. And you might take a step to the right, you might take a step to the left. And it's really about thinking your career. You might need to move lateral before you move up. You might even need to take a step back before you move up. Those types of mentality shifts. Another example of something that was brand new to the league at Major League Baseball is that we rolled out something called the Employee Engagement Survey, which is definitely not a new concept to most other organizations. For MLB, it was the first time that employees had a chance to share their feelings and put their voice into a system. And then obviously we aggregated all the data on the back end. But it was really something that we used in a fantastic tool for all employees to be able to share their voice on ways that we can continue evolving the culture at MLB. So those types of things that are all career development or employee led, that at the end of the day, I know really make an impact on someone's work life is sort of the areas that I got the most joy in my career. The changes that I see happening within the next 10 years, I absolutely see the sports industry continue evolving. I'm seeing sports starting to try to catch up with a lot of other industries, tech, which I just moved into the tech world, financial services, fintech, a variety of others. And I see a lot of hyper growth and evolution in that way for the sports industry. We're also seeing a lot of additional high-ranking females, especially on specific teams across the US, which has been fantastic. For example, Kim Ng, the first female GM with the Marlins, announced this past year. Bianca Smith, the first Black female minor league coach at the Red Sox. So those types of examples, I hope, continue evolving and taking the industry to the next level.
Great. I love the rock climbing wall analogy. It's very pertinent to our industry. And we actually have a question that one of our guests will ask in a little bit that relates to that. So I'll come back to that. Tracee, what about you? Highlights and vision for the next 10 years?
Right. I have probably a lot more years to look back than Katie and Melissa. But when I did reflect a little bit, for me, the highlights have always been the first, right? For whatever reason, I'm always in the position of being the first, whatever. At whatever organization that I've been at. At Michigan State, I was the first in the position that they had created. So I built a platform for event management because they never had one. I was the first to introduce an internship program there. And so I launched it, started bringing in undergrads. And actually, Emilio Collins, another OU grad, was one of my interns. He was the wrestler at Michigan State. And now he probably makes more money than I do. But just to have those connections and being in places to be the first has been a tremendous flower in my cap, so to speak, when I look back and see all the things that I've been able to do in uncharted territory. From there, I went on to the NBA, WNBA, and was part of the first expansion of WNBA teams and saw the league at its highest height with 16 teams at the time. Again, being a first, working with the first female commissioner in Val Ackerman. Again, those were some exciting times for the league. Left there and started working for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which really no one had heard of in New York City, but I was the first that planted the seed there. And my connections with the WNBA allowed me an opportunity to be the first chaplain for the New York Liberty. So again, just lots of firsts and throughout my career. And now here at the Big East, again, being the first chief diversity officer and only chief diversity officer at a conference office has opened up some other doors as well. So I don't take that lightly, and it's been a great journey. And I do take liberty in painting my own path for these first opportunities, which some people might find scary because sometimes there's not a lot of scripted or rigid job descriptions, which in essence is also good because again, you can write your own story for a lot of these positions. In terms of the growth in the next 10 years, I think both Katie and Melissa hit on it. I do think technology is going to continue to shape the way we operate, not only from a fan perspective, but also from a currency perspective. I do think that the way that people consume sports will continue to evolve, particularly as Gen Z and Gen X get older, in terms of, not a lot of maybe people sitting in the stands per se in these big arenas. Because again, our phones are now becoming these workable devices that we live on. from sunup to sundown. So I do think technology is going to play a huge role moving forward in the sports industry and probably other industries as well. And I don't think we probably have even conceived what it can do at this point. Again, I think analytics are very, very popular in all industries, in particular in sports. Even in the coaching ranks, they're using analytics. So I do think there's going to be room to figure out how to make more data-based decisions, whether that's in selling, again, fan engagement, so sourcing different vendors. I do think there's a niche in the analytics industry that, again, perhaps right now is a little bit untapped, but I definitely see growth in that space moving forward.
Thanks. So our next question here is, I'm going to start with Katie. What advice do you have for students or recent grads who are working to get into the sport industry?
Sure. I have 3 pieces of advice or tips. Number 1 would be networking. I would say, and sorry, Tracee and Melissa, I'm sure I'm stealing a lot of your thunder on this one, but I would say LinkedIn. Don't be shy to reach out to people. I've definitely done my fair share of shooting someone a note of whether it was their career that I admire or some type of path that I know that, or a trail that they've blazed. Don't be shy to, shoot them a message and just tell them congratulations, or that you would love to set up a coffee chat or an informational interview, whatever the case may be. I would also say, along the lines of networking, think about whatever your dream job would be. I do a ton of career coaching, and I normally ask people, you don't have to know what your final destination is. You might not even know what your next is, but always think about that next, because in order to get to next, you're going to have to make a stop somewhere else along the way. So take a little time to scratch out and draft what that could look like. Chances are there's going to be 10 different options and 10 different paths to get you to that. But just thinking through which of those paths might be the best for you, it's definitely worth giving that some thought, and then reaching out to people who have taken that path in the past. So again, networking, taking advantage of webinars similar to this one and all the career resources, reaching out to people after you attend the webinar. So networking, number 1. Number 2, I would say yes to everything in terms of opportunities. I know that Melissa and Tracee both hit on being open-minded and flexible. You never know what event you're going to get invited to. You go to it and you end up meeting someone new, or you realize, wow, I'd actually rather be in marketing rather than, whatever industry that you thought that you would, continue on in. So just say yes to everything and be open-minded. And then 3, this is definitely once you get to that point in your career, I would say learning the business of sports is critical the higher you go. Understanding how the org makes money, what does their financial sheet look like? What is the business acumen? Because your knowledge of sports or your industry is only going to get you so far. Once you hit that next level, you're also going to have to understand how the league or how the team or whatever operates from a business perspective. So those would be a couple tips of advice that I would have.
Excellent, thanks. Tracee, would you like to go next?
Sure. I would say the first piece of advice I would have is bloom where you're planted. I think so many times you land a job and you're fast forwarding, 5-6 years because you want to be the GM, whatever that magical title is. And so your eyes are so focused on that next or higher journey that you're not necessarily given 100% in the role that you have. And trust me, your supervisor knows that, right? So I would say, do the best work that you can wherever you are. And when you leave there, they should feel the loss of your employment because you've done such a wonderful job. The other thing I would say is, take a look at your social media. Employers do look at that, even though you have those words, tweets are my own, perhaps. But again, those tweets are your own also is a reflection of who you are, what your value system is. And so I would just, be careful in terms of what you post and how you want to be portrayed in social media, because again, it's so expansive in all these various platforms. And I think the other piece of advice I would have is just continue to be a lifelong learner. As Katie mentioned, knowing the business is one thing, but you have to constantly consume information because sports changes so quickly from day to day. in year to year. And so what was popular or a great best practice a year ago might not be a best practice the following year. So you have to stay abreast of what's happening in the industry and continue to consume and read publications, books, take, as you said, webinars, any kind of courses that you can consume in your free time. Again, that's balancing also doing a good job and blooming where you're planted. But I'm a big lifelong learner, and you can never know too much because if you're doing it, not necessarily everybody in your organization is doing it. So that's just another thing that you can bring to the table is information, and information is key wherever you are. The more you know, the further you can grow.
Excellent advice. Melissa?
Yeah, so Katie and Tracee made such great points. I won't repeat them. The one thing I'll add that's maybe a little bit personal to my experience, don't change. Look, like I think we all are who we are in some capacity. I think change and evolve in those positive ways from a professional development standpoint is always important. But I remember when I first moved to New York, I was first there for an internship. I was one of the first sales and marketing interns at Facebook. And that was kind of my first big gig. And that was my first time in New York City ever. I was a junior in college. And I just saw myself wanting to maybe fit in or be a little bit more New York or be a little bit more like my colleagues. And that doesn't work. It does not work, and you can't fake it. And look, I'm a kid from West Virginia, and I always kind of found that as my foundation, and I've grown and I've evolved, and my maturity is so much different than it was then, but I still have those roots and values. I know Tracee mentioned values. That's so key to who you're going to be at work. And don't change or adjust that for anybody, because it will be temporary. It won't be long-term, and people will see right through that. So use who you are as an advantage to be a little bit of a different perspective in the room too. Like, I don't work with a lot of people from West Virginia. Jerry West is our logo man. People forget. I always have to remind them. I always get made fun of just a little bit in terms of I'm someone that I went to Olive Garden. I went to Panera for bagels growing up in New York. That's a complete sin. You can't go to Panera for a bagel. So I've had these arguments and these fun back and forths, but I always kind of lean into that part of me because it's definitely what got me to this point, and it's the grit and the determination that I think from your upbringing that continues to shape who you become as an adult and in your personal and professional life. So that's one I would just leave you guys with. Don't forget that along the way.
Great, thanks. So I have one more question that I've got prepared here, and then we are going to open up some questions on the chat. But before I ask that last one, I'm just going to ask one of the participants' questions because it's kind of in follow-up to what we just talked about. And I'm going to direct this to Katie. So this question is from Carly Bell, who asks, what advice you have specifically for transferring roles within the industry? So she's wanting to know how you switch from media into marketing or digital for a team or league. Any specific advice on that?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to go back to my point earlier about networking, just spending time. I mean, Tracee mentioned being well-read from sports perspective, industry perspective, business perspective, et cetera. Study who's who within organizations and who has a role within that particular industry or job that you would, potentially hope to fall in. I would reach out to them. I wouldn't be shy about that at all. Or if you know that you're connected to someone, that's the beauty of LinkedIn, right? Finding out that we have a mutual connection and saying, do you know anything about them? Would they be willing to talk? Do you know anything about their background? Again, back to LinkedIn, you can also, go into the posts that they have either liked or that they have shared. If they shared a great article or a great, webinar that they're going to be joining or a panel that they're on, make sure that you sign up for that if you can, so that you can go get some information along those lines. And I would also say, this is, if you're still in school, but you know that you're potentially wanting to get into a specific industry, the people that you're with right now at OU or the industry that you're in now, these are your peers. These are going to be the people that are going to be able to introduce you to so-and-so at that next organization, or they're going to be able to tell you, here's this great networking event that I'm going to, or here's some additional resources that are usually right at your fingertips. So I would say don't be shy about tapping into your peers and eventually your coaches and your mentors that will be advocates for you to continue growing in your career. Using myself as an example, I know that I tap into all my friends along the way, a lot that I met at OU. to be each other's career coaches and say, you know, I'm kind of interested in getting into that industry. Tell me what you know about it. Tell me what I can do to learn more. And then usually I'll get a couple tips and then, you know, continue along that way as well. So reach out to your network as much as possible.
Some more great
Melissa,
advice there. Oh,
Can I add something to that? That was
yeah.
great, Katie. Just from my perspective, I've worked in every facet of sports, from nonprofit to faith-based to professional. And I think people sometimes get stuck on this linear path for their career. Like, you know, I want to be this, then I want to be this, and then this is going to get me to be this. Know that there's not a linear path anymore in anything. Very rarely are people staying in the same roles for 20, 25 years, perhaps like our parents did in their careers or areas of employment. So don't limit yourself. I mean, it's okay to start out in communications and then want to shift to community relations. But I think the important thing is to look at your resume and perhaps identify gaps or holes in terms of skills that you don't have, and find ways to build upon that to get to that next level in terms of where you want to transition. Because mostly every skill that we have on this panel is transferable, right? Yes, I can work for the Pro League, but also I can work in college, and I can work outside of college, because all of the skills that I have as a leader can be a positive attribute to any industry. So just think about the skills that you have and how they can be transferred to other areas. So again, I would just encourage you not to limit yourself and don't get stuck on, you know, this connecting the dots path to get to ultimately that dream job.
Thanks. Did you want to add anything, Melissa, before I move on?
I think they nailed it. Honestly, I feel like those are the points that I was going to make. I would focus on, you know, one thing that I've learned over the past 5 years too at the MBA is I've kind of evolved in my career. There's a big priority on leading people. And Katie mentioned this a lot in terms of just being able to adjust your style and really think about not only your own individual work product and path, but how do you inspire others? That's been something I've really had to lean into, you know, as you manage people and as you kind of grow. And that's not something I necessarily prepared for in, you know, in any individual one-on-one or conversation. I think that's some deep things you have to kind of look towards and put some time against to really figure out what type of leader you want to be, even at a young age, and start taking notes and start really monitoring the people that lead you, and kind of jot down what you like and what you don't, and the kind of leader that you want to be along the way. I think that's really telling of at least how much, what your perception is going to be to others and how you continue to inspire and get the best results out of your team.
Thanks. Another question that we have from the one of the members is from Tatiana, who asks for Tracee. You seem to say that your highlights have been the first of everything that you've done, and she's wondering, have you ever had the urge to become an entrepreneur yourself?
Ironically, I am trying to start a side hustle, so to speak. I am going to be pursuing consulting in the diversity and inclusion space. So I do some of that work on the side. I don't necessarily know if I'm ready to launch out in the deep and do it full time, but I certainly have aspirations of helping others in this space. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, so I'm going to open it up. If there are additional questions, if you could put it in the chat. And while any other questions funnel in here, my final prepared question is just to reflect back on what you might miss about Athens or your time here at OU. So why don't we start with Tracee on this one?
I would say without a doubt the relationships. I mean, looking back at my graduate school class, we were very, very tight. And some of us are still very tight to this day. And so those relationships are just key. And not only, as I think Katie and Melissa already said, that's your network, right? You're building your network while you're in school. And so those days are always cherished. And when we have the opportunity to get together, it's really, really special. And when something happens to celebrate in their lives, or even something that's tragic, we're there to support each other even after all this time. So I would say the people for sure. I would have to also give a shout out to Doc Higgins, who recently retired. He was my #1 cheerleader. And you don't necessarily have a lot of cheerleaders sometimes when you're in the workspace, particularly when you're moving so quickly to execute. And again, as Melissa said, keeping people inspired and staying on task and delivering all the deliverables that are on your plate. There's sometimes not a lot of cheerleading happening in the office amongst your colleagues. So just kind of having those professors and people that really believe in you when you're a student, I definitely miss that championing sometimes when I need it most.
Melissa?
Well, first, can I say Jackios? Because that's one of my number ones. I do miss some of the amazing things about Athens and the magic of Court Street and the bricks. There's definitely a simplicity about being in Athens that kind of takes you back for a second. And I will always cherish that as part of that time of my life. I think there's so many great people there. There's such a relatability and there's such a natural community there that I think it's obviously hard to replicate anywhere else. As Tracee said, it's a really special community. And Tracee brought up something that, maybe I wasn't going to share, but I think it's kind of important. Like, I always think that OU and Athens, right, it's really supported the university in the sense that there was a lot of cross collaboration, even when I was there, in terms of, I was a journalism major. I was focused on kind of news and sports reporting initially, but then I was exposed to the Sales Center and Copeland and Dr. Ridpath, who was super helpful in my development of bridging the gap to not only journalism and that part of the industry, but then how does that merge with business and how does that merge with sales? I really learned a lot from that collaboration in terms of, the schools and those departments working with each other to really get the best educational tools to the students. And that's not something that I think happens that often as it should. And that was something that was unique to my kind of development that I really cherished from OU as well.
Great to hear. And Katie?
Yeah, so I would say first the people, similar to what Tracee and Melissa have mentioned, just the community of friends. The friends that I met at OU are still to this day my best friends. We still travel around the world together. We still connect with each other and are constantly in communication. So that's been fantastic. And second, since I'm, in the urban concrete jungle here, I think I'm going to say that I miss the vibe of a campus. Nature, it's one of the most beautiful campuses that could ever, be in existence. Yep, got it right here. And it's, looking back, it was just always such a gorgeous place to be. And I always thought how beautiful it was. And now that I'm away from it, makes me appreciate it that much more. I am going to be hopefully coming back soon. I married another former Bobcat. We did not know each other at OU. He's 2 years ahead of me. So Dave and I, we now have 2 little ones and we're planning on bringing them back and can't wait to walk around the campus and introduce them to everything that we experienced at OU as well.
Love it. Well, I don't see any additional questions in the chat. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Dory. And I just want to say thank you so much for all of that insight. I know I even took some nuggets away. So I appreciate all of your time and support of the Bobcats.
And Melissa, just as we close out, I think I sent this message directly to Dory, but I do want to echo the point that this Bobcat community is so tightly knit and so small. My first day at the MBA in 2016, Katie Myers was my orientation lead and the first person I was connected to at the MBA, and we went around the horn and shared which college we were from. And I was like, Ohio University, and she goes, what? Me too. So it's really cool to have those moments. And trust me, there's so many Bobcats out there. You'll find one, and those stories will continue to happen. But it is really special as part of this panel, and I was excited to be able to share some of that with you all. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I just want to say thank you to everyone who was able to attend today, and also a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists. It's been so grateful to spend some time with you all today and learn from you and your experiences, and I appreciate that so much. As has been mentioned several times in this event, networking is key. So I just wanted to go ahead and drop in the chat a link to the Bobcat Network. So obviously, and Melissa just hit it on the head, this Bobcat connection that comes around. The Bobcat Network recently relaunched with an upgrade, and it's a chance, it's kind of like a LinkedIn for Bobcats only, but also has a few extra fun features for our fellow Bobcats. So I'd encourage you all to check on there to make some connections with your fellow Bobcats, because obviously you can reach out to anyone in the sports industry, but Bobcats have each other's backs. So I definitely wanted to drop that link in the chat as well for everyone to access if they're interested in growing their Bobcat and growing network and growing their network in general. Additionally, I mentioned at the top of the hour that next month we will be having our second Women in Leadership series edition. So that will be with our Ohio University alumnus entrepreneur, Sierra Boyd. She actually owns her own streetwear fashion business using recycled material. The link to register for that is in the chat. She has been featured on RuPaul's Drag Race and in Vogue Mexico. So got a lot of really cool, fun, edgy stuff coming out from her, which is really exciting. So we hope that you all will be able to join us for that event as well. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you all for being here again today, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.